Hello, folks. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So what we are going to do today is basically in the first part, we will do the discussion, anything that you want to discuss based on what you have seen on the deep fakes, the talk, as well as the write-up that I sent you, and anything else that, I mean, it doesn't have to be just about that, but if you see any connections to something else that we talked about before that you want to discuss, that would be fine too. And after that, then I will do some fun, some technical stuff. Hopefully, I think it's fun, but you will see. Okay. As basically that would be sort of, I'll get there as to, what should intelligent agents be doing? And that will sort of get you face to face with a whole bunch of words, terms that you may have heard, but you didn't quite have any understanding. For example, things like, in addition to, some of you may have heard of deep learning. We talked about that sort of, and then there is another word that you may have heard of called reinforcement learning, which is essentially what AlphaGo, for example, used to beat Lee Sedol in the Go tournament. We'll sort of get to that, but in an indirect way as to what actually does it mean to be able to talk about things like reinforcement learning, but it will come at the end, hopefully. Okay, so that's basically what I am going to do. Any comments? And by the way, so today is, if we were actually doing this class in real, in front of each other, I would have got you sweets today, because today is like a big festival in India called Deepavali, which is like a huge festival of fireworks. Since you have to deal with my Indian accent, you should get some sweets too on the day of the festival. But since, I mean, I can throw stuff at you, but that's the best I can do. So that's that. And so let's get started. And what questions, if any, what thoughts you had in reading about the deep fakes stuff? Who would like to go first?
I've got something.
Okay.
I was reading in this sort of the second half of your article about perception won't be a reality.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about a couple things that could help deal with deepfakes. One which was regulation,
Mm-hmm.
but I was more interested in. I think this will be more effective. Is the what you called cryptographic authentication techniques, and I was wondering if you could talk more about what that might mean or what that would look like.
So, I mean, again, that's an entire area. In general, the simplest, first of all, is anybody else? I mean, so I do have some people who are very unhappy that there is not enough discussion here, and that when somebody asks something, instead of letting you folks speak, I am answering. So let me try to stop and say, is anybody else interested in trying to make sense of that question? Okay, so I said this, so don't yell at me that I answered the question. So cryptography in general is, you guys use cryptography, right? I mean, this basically what you do about encrypting and decrypting. And so that's obviously the computational support for that is, oftentimes things like there are certain computational problems that are extremely hard, in a complexity theoretic sense, computational complexity sense. Those of you who are taking computer science courses will hear about things like NP hardness and things like undecidability and so on. So there are certain classes of problems, including factorization of very large numbers. Those are basically known to be hard in the sense nobody can write an efficient algorithm for those up until now, okay? And in fact, because it's not just up until now, there are actually theoretical statements saying that unless some crazy things happen, such as in computer science, people talk about P and NP. In fact, those of you who take computer science will at some point of time or other worry about is P equal to NP or not, which essentially means is the polynomial time, are the problems that can be solved in polynomial time using an algorithm, is that set of problems the same as another set of problems called non-deterministic polynomial, okay? It turns out that people assume right now that P is not equal to NP, but nobody has been able to prove it. But assuming that it is not possible, it turns out you can show that things like factorization, etc., are hard problems. And they can't be, and there's nobody who's going to be able to write simple polynomial time solutions for them. And those become the basis for cryptography. And you use it already. And all that we are saying about deepfakes is that you can essentially let people, so you can essentially certify the origin of an image using cryptographic techniques. For example, you guys do HTTPS, right? When you do, when you look at it, when web started, which is like less than 30 years back, people would just do HTTP. And then they will just give the name of the, let's say you're trying to go to ASU.edu, they'll give HTTP ASU.edu. Okay, and the way that would happen is this ASU.edu, there'll be a middle guy who would convert the ASU.edu into an actual machine address, and then your call will go to that machine address. If I kind of intervene between you and this trusted middle guy, and when you say ASU.edu, I send it to some other website, you can't stop that. That can happen. And you would not know, for example, that you didn't get to the right website. And HTTPS basically, for example, has made sure that at least that problem has been solved. There is no way of faking sites in that sense. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the same thing can be done for media too. And when that happens, essentially you are not trusting anything unless there is a proof that it originated from a person that that you believe it originated from. Okay, so that's basically the idea. It's a sort of at some level, it's a sort of a depressing life, right? Your mom calls and says, "How are you?" or something. Can you send me a couple of bucks or something? And you say, "I don't trust you. First, authenticate yourself." Essentially, that's what we're going to do for the voice, for the images, for pretty much everything else. It's a non-romantic, depressing life. But on the other hand, we are living non-romantic, depressing lives already. Why did we need HTTPS? We should be fine with HTTP, but it's not a huge deal, putting an S at the end of the thing and making sure that it actually becomes a cryptographically authenticated thing. So that actually comes from outside of the AI technology in essence, because the reality is at some point of time, you can't tell the difference between the real and made up thing. You will not be able to tell, at least by your eyes, at which point you need a separate kind of identification. And that's basically going to be the way it will be. Yeah, somebody else wanted to talk something. I see it says, oh yeah, this is you. Yeah, fine. Okay. Did that answer your question?
So what you're saying is that the cryptography would stop sort of like a man-in-the-middle attack, but you'd still have to trust the source.
Yeah, I mean, no, yeah, of course. I mean, that's so the entire world then has to, it's not a simple one-off solution. It's like all of us, it's like what we are going through right now in pandemic. You can stop the virus if all of us wear masks and all of us sit at our homes and nobody goes anywhere. That's a huge change. It's not like, I will just wear my mask and then everything else will be normal. That will be much simpler, but that's not what I'm talking about. The entire infrastructure has to change. Every media that you send to anybody has to be authenticated, and the source has to be authenticated. And when that happens, I mean, to be able to do that, of course, I mean, it's also an interesting scenario when you get to that point. If you build that kind of an infrastructure, then certainly you don't need to depend on your eyes. You don't need to depend on your ability to recognize voice. Okay. In terms of to kind of throw some cold water on this, it turns out that factorization is exactly the kind of problems that quantum computers can solve in polynomial time. Okay, so quantum computers can't solve everything. I mean, it's not like quantum computers are going to solve problems that are undecidable, for example. That's not the way it works. It's just that there is a certain class of problems that essentially in the class NP that can be solved faster by quantum computers when they take off. So when that happens, then the current basis for cryptography, which is factorization of large numbers, is now suspect. But we haven't gotten up to that. So the question, of course, is where, by that time, in fact, if you have figured out a better way of doing cryptography, otherwise this is not actually as great a solution as it sounds. Other comments, other thoughts? How many of you have actually either watched the talk or read the write-up or both? Okay. Yeah, so any thoughts? Anything else that you wanted to bring up?
I actually have a question about it. Like you talk a little bit about the program that your company has to fight against AI, like using AI to fight against the deepfakes. So is there still like any loopholes where like the deepfake still like can like win over the AI, or is it like already like solid?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you're trying to say. So your question is that are we able to stop deepfakes right now or not? Is that what you're asking? I'm not sure.
Yeah, like using the product that you have,
yeah, no, first of all, okay, so let's put that perspective. I mean, actually, by the way, that connection to the company is not really academic part. And, since I just happened to say that you're asking that, I can tell you that in all these cases, these are all moving targets. Okay. Spam mail. Think of spam mail. Spam mail is deepfake mail. Do you understand what I'm saying? What happened? Have we stopped spam completely? We are much better off right now than when email started. In the beginning, when email started, everybody was basically playing fair. Okay. And then everybody got email, and then people started, changing. In fact, when I was a grad student, obviously, we could change our from address directly. And so you will get an email saying it's coming from some other address. I could do that like right away. I don't need to go through major, hacks at all. It was just allowed because people thought nobody would do it. If they did it all, they would only do it in good fun, and it's all fine. It's all the hacker culture. But then, of course, spam basically started becoming a big problem because advertisers found that they can send lots and lots of emails They can send you mails making you feel as if they're coming from certain people. If you're not opening enough of those mails. In the beginning, they would just send lots and lots of mails. Then they started sending mails that are actually coming from certain people that you might be knowing. You heard about all these, issues, right? Have we completely solved it? No. I mean, it's like as you close one loop, one hole, then somebody else finds some other way of essentially getting through the controls. Because there's a lot of money to be made, it turns out, by sending spam mail. And because there's always some sucker in billions of people, and if they do send the money to the Nigerian king or whatever, it's good. They're basically making, it's not, there's no cost to send the spam mail. It's very cheap. And the benefit basically is non-trivial. And so people will try it. Right? It's the same thing for deepfakes. It's a moving target. Right now, for example, Facebook and all these other places I mentioned that in the talk, they have this deepfake detection challenge. Now, the problem with the deepfake detection challenge is that they pick known deepfakes and see if you can detect them. Okay, that's like asking whether you guys will realize that a mail from Nigerian king is spam mail or not. If anybody is left who still is expecting mails from Nigerian kings with millions, obviously they deserve what they get. Most people already know that, that ship has sailed. It's a spam mail. But Nigerian king himself is not sending those mails anymore. I mean, whoever is making these mails are not as longer saying that. So finding things that have been done before is only going to stop those things from happening again, right? But the new deepfakes might be actually exploiting a very different set of things that the current deepfake detection technology is unable to do. That was my point. In fact, I make this big point about moving target, it being a moving target. And it's an arms race between people who would like to do deepfakes for whatever reasons, and people who are trying to stop them from doing it. And it's not there's no simple answer to it. If anybody says we have solved the problem, distrust it. Okay. The only way of solving, as I said, is things like this cryptographic authentication. But again, if you think about it that way, what is cyber security? That's the same thing too. Essentially, all this antivirus software that basically will find a new exploit that happened and then try to fix it. But then, so that at least those exploits won't be tried again. But the smart people who are trying to hack your computer are coming up with new exploits. So in cybersecurity, people talk about this thing called zero-day attacks, as if you can somehow stop attacks that you have never seen. That's not really true, unless the guy who is making that attack is not particularly smart. Your best hope is that your opponents are not particularly smart, right? If they are, as smart as you are, their zero-day attack would not be something that you would have expected. So the first time around, you would actually not be able to detect it. The interesting thing is, in the past, we always assumed that this seeing is believing. That's like a very strange situation. So we kind of assumed that what we see by eyes is something that we can believe in. And I think actually your generation no longer does. My assumption is you guys have Snapchat, you have used all this social media stuff. Nothing is actually believing. Seeing in particular is not believing, but my generation and some generations between mine and yours still believe that. So this is one of the other things that I point out in my write-up, that really people become less desensitized to these sort of deepfakes. Part of the effectiveness of deepfakes is going to be how much are you willing to trust your eyes. And my assumption is most of you already don't trust your eyes. Okay, and so good for you. So the old folks like me who do basically, will slowly go away. And so as people become more desensitized, the effectiveness of the defects, at least for the visual defects, will reduce. Okay.
Professor, I have a question. As
Sure.
far as the deep fakes, I've heard that recently they've had a lot of success with using computer vision and in order to detect blood flow in like actual video versus deepfakes, where deepfakes won't have the blood flow in the skin. Do you know
Mhm.
anything about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just give me a second. That's the same idea in general of the splotches and so on. So again, look, this is exactly what is happening in cybersecurity too. So if you find, there is no one thing called deep fake generation technology. Okay, so people will basically generate images that look like real images in multiple different ways. And the first time, for example, they made the very first, deepfake videos used to be off with the lip sync. So even people can tell. So one useful thing is sometimes people may not be able to tell. We are actually extremely good at, I mean, I know you all seen this, right? When the lip sync is off, when people are speaking on the video, it just drives you up the wall, right? You cannot look at that video. And so it's something that we can catch on. So basically the people who are making the deepfake videos have to make sure that at least the lip sync is not off, right? That was, in fact, I think, what's her name? Sarah Cooper's whole claim to fame is that she can do lip sync extremely well. You know what I'm talking about, right? Sarah Cooper, the Trump impersonator. But the point is that basically, if you do that, we are more willing to suspend our disbelief. The next level, so even if they get the lip sync right, bunch of other things that we don't consciously pay attention to. In fact, even lip sync, we don't consciously pay attention to. We subconsciously pay attention to, and then it raises to conscious level, and we get annoyed and switch off the video after a while. Okay, but there are other things which we don't even subconsciously pay attention to. For example, basically correlations between eyes and lips, for example, that exist, but you may not notice it. Or similarly, this thing about the blood flow aspects, which exist, but you don't notice it. So if you don't notice it, then if the machine notices it, that would be the beginnings of saying that it is a deep, that's a way of, checking. However, the moment it becomes clear that this is what you're going to check, I'm going to make my deep fake such that this problem will not be there. That's why this is everything important in life is arms race. We are here through an arms race, right? You realize that basically because the entire evolution is an arms race. And so it's basically going to be the case that in these deepfake scenarios, it's, stopping them is going to be an arms race with people trying to make. And the only worry is I'm already sure that there will come a time when you really cannot tell the difference. But we already are past the time where our eyes cannot tell the difference. Okay, so here is my question. If your eyes cannot tell the difference, right, as to whether you're talking to your mother on the video or a deep fake of your mother on the video, and then there is an assistant saying, that's a deep fake of your mother. And you ask the assistant, the AI assistant, why? And the AI assistant can say, well, it's because the blood flow patterns are different from the real mother based on what I've seen before. Or it says, well, it's not cryptographically authenticated. Both are fine, both are similar because neither of them are any natural interaction. We are not born to do either of them biologically. So you're just getting help from somewhere. Whereas at least the cryptographic one, until the cryptography itself is broken, it's going to stay. Whereas the deepfake detection one is a moving target. But right now, I think there is still a lot of space for checking bunch of these kinds of interesting things that people haven't figured out. But the problem really, as, as, as I think people say, it's like, this is the problem with cybersecurity too. If you figure out what is the way, what is the thing that's different from the deepfakes for the with the real images, and you go blabber out all this on the TV, then the people making the deepfakes will change the deepfakes. Did you guys, for example, know that at the time, you know, Alan Turing, right? I mean, did I mention Alan Turing at least once in this talk? In this Alan Turing, the imitation game, the guy, etc. So he was well known for breaking Enigma, the code of Enigma. Did you guys know that even though they have broken the code of Enigma, and they knew exactly where Nazis were going to bomb, which ships will be bombed, etc., because they have actually decoded the thing, they did not act on their knowledge because they were waiting for the big payday. Do you understand that? So you might actually ask that it's ethically quite dubious. You know, if you are in one of those ships that was going to be torpedoed, and Churchill knew, but they said, the heck, I don't care about you. I'm going to wait for saving the much bigger world than just your life. You'd say, screw the world. I mean, save me first. But the moment they say, the moment it becomes clear that Enigma has been broken, Enigma would not be used. The moment you, so these are one of the sad parts of these deepfake detection technologies, unless there is a theoretical reason as to why I cannot generate deepfakes that would succeed in your test. Just saying currently, most of the existing deepfakes in the wild don't succeed in that test doesn't mean anything. See, this is the problem. Again, this is the problem with, in fact, dealing with humans. The deepfakes are generated by humans. You know, I mean, if you've seen the enemy, it's the humans who's the enemy. Like, whereas if we are strategizing against coronavirus, we don't need to worry that coronavirus behind the scenes is reading New York Times and Nature and figuring out what it is that we are doing to try and catch it. And it's going to change. It's at least not reading our papers. It's just, of course, there's evolution. Obviously, it's just always mutating. But at least it's not saying, oh, that's the gene that you're looking for. Okay, tomorrow I would stop using that gene. You're screwed at that point. So this is the point that I think I mentioned too. Games against nature are so much simpler than games against people. This was the Harrison Ford analogy, right? Basically, Star Wars, Harrison Ford analogy, in the sense that there was this one small, vulnerability to Death Star. Nature would not have found it. That randomly some lightning will strike you on that little vulnerable spot is extremely low. But Harrison Ford striking you on exactly that vulnerable place is 100%. Right? So the deepfakes are not natural. They are made by you and me. And so it's like you take it as a challenge. Oh, so fine. I mean, now that Vincent is saying this blood flow thing seems to be important, okay, I'll take weekend off and then try to make deepfakes that will essentially succeed on this test. Right? So I mean, again, I'm not as worried about robots going crazy and killing us. I'm worried about us going crazy and killing each other through robots and through AI technology, through everything that we have. We're extremely good at that. Okay. So I'm much less worried about superintelligence than I'm worried about our intelligence and how we can use it against each other. And it essentially gives a bigger stick right now with AI technology. You have more ways of getting on each other's nerves. There was a raised hand somewhere.
Well, I had a question also, like speaking of Enigma and cybersecurity, I would just like imagine this is, especially with like how many deep fakes there are like around political figures, I would imagine this is sort of becoming like a national security issue. And I'm just wondering if the government would be like putting in any money to develop more like cryptography programs to recognize these.
No, right now, it's very much on their minds, first of all. I mean, it's very much, there are regulations being thrown, for example, and then people are interested in figuring out a way out of this problem that we nicely got ourselves into. And so the part, of course, is that there are like the two kinds of things they can do. One is regulation, right? You can say that if you are doing this and you get caught doing this, we'll put you in jail. You know, we don't yet have like three-dimensional deep fakes that can go to jail instead of you. Unless you get to that point, you know, saying that I'll put you in jail will be a deterrent for you, right? That is something that people are doing. Before, in the past, it wasn't even, I mean, that's the thing, right? You can't just say after the fact that what you did before was illegal according to the rules I made today. That's not allowed. So you have to actually go ahead and make rules. And how many rules are you going to make? You need to know what sort of crazy things people do so that you can make laws to stop that. So already there's a whole bunch that's going on that. Beyond that, essentially, it's like government basically can give money for research, but not much more than that. I mean, research isn't going to happen in terms of, you know, give me 10 kgs or 10 kilograms of research, you know, 15 pounds of research. That's not going to happen. So they are certainly very interested in supporting these kinds of things. I think federal funding agencies, but yeah. And they are worried, and you know, in general, people are very much worried. But again, the other thing that I mention often is, it's not that deep fakes didn't exist before AI. It was called Photoshop. Do you see what I'm saying? It was called Photoshop. Okay. In fact, do you guys know that they used to have, I mean, I think until every once in a while you read that some museum has been very carefully, you know, displaying this Van Gogh, and they found that it wasn't Van Gogh at all, but was somebody else who made something which looks like Van Gogh's painting. Now, you know, don't even get me started on why does that change the value of the painting? You know, that's a whole entire meta question. If you like the painting, how does it matter who painted it? But that's not for me to, you know, get into. But we know that at least when they did this, they had to very carefully copy, you know, the style, etc. Okay, it required some actual effort from the person. Photoshop required some actual effort from the person. Before email, there was spam mail. That's what you used to call it, junk mail. We still get it right now. In fact, we only get junk mail because nobody writes letters anymore to anybody in actual postal mail, right? So junk mail was always there, but sending junk mail cost money. Okay, so you have a cost and you have a benefit. You had to trade off. Suddenly email changed it in such a way that sending a gazillion emails is basically next to nothing in cost for you. And if you send a gazillion emails, some sucker will by mistake click on something. And that's good enough for you, right? That's basically, and the Photoshop-based deepfake videos were being made mostly for like very high celebrity people, etc., just to show off that this can be done kinds of things, or perhaps to kind of do electoral mischief. Now they can be made much faster. I mean, I don't know how many of you seen that in the talk I showed, that Zav app. How many of you have heard of Zav app, by the way? It came and went like very fast. You know, basically it was, I think it's like 1.5 years back, you know, it came out in China, and it basically, Zav allowed you to sort of put yourself in, you know, in any movie scene, essentially. So there are like great, if you, even now you go up and go to Twitter and check, you will get all these things. I showed some of them, but, you know, essentially, you know, instead of Leonardo DiCaprio, you will be there, you know, suddenly. Basically, you can put yourself in the picture there. right? It made it basically a technology that anybody can use. At that point, the number of misuses for that can also increase quite significantly. Number of creative uses increases, but number of misuses also increases. And I'm less worried, honestly, about deep fakes of Nancy Pelosi and Trump and Obama. I'm more worried about deep fakes of you guys. Unless you get to their level of notoriety, if somebody makes a deep fake of you, and it's just your word against theirs as to who is the right thing. Whereas if it has done for Obama or Nancy Pelosi, the entire set of independent news organizations will spend time trying to figure out, trying to actually establish that this is not real. So that is the worry. It just makes it easier to do this. But then another way of looking at it is our entire human civilization has been going in that direction. So if you look at it that way, it's not like AI suddenly became, as I said, email, spam mail has huge a deal. It increased, as you're spending more time on the email, spam mail in email is much worse than junk mail in your post box, in your mailbox, physical mailbox. You just throw away the, junk mail. Whereas spam mail, you have to go through it. And just like spam mail detection, every once in a while, I don't know how many of you have had a scenario where some important mail got stuck in spam for you. Those are called false positives. Those are called false positives. And that's what the Charlie Chaplin lookalike issue is. I was saying that in the talk that Charlie Chaplin took part in this Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest, and he came in second or third. Because even though he is the real Charlie Chaplin, the other Charlie Chaplin lookalikes were more like real Charlie Chaplin for the people who decide who is Charlie Chaplin. Do you see what I'm saying? So in general, this spam mail essentially you can have a false positive saying that it's a spam mail. And one of the strangest things, I don't know if this happened to you or not, Gmail has this problem. It happened to me more than once. It would put in spam a reply to a message I sent you. So I would send you a mail saying, hey, why did we do this on such and such a day? And you respond to me, and it will go into spam. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in fact, that basically shows you in some sense the stupidity of the spam detection technology, because it is looking only at the single mail. It isn't even looking at the longitudinal history of the mail. This mail came because you sent a mail to somebody. If you send a mail to somebody, you probably know them, and they're responding to you. You can't actually say that if any of you send me a mail that I don't like, I can't call it spam mail. I can call it rude mail, but not spam. I know you guys. And I sent you a mail, you send me a mail back. How can that be spam? And yet this happens in Gmail spam detection. So in general, this whole detection technologies open up their own set of problems. Okay, because they try to take an easy way out. So how many of you have heard of, this is the thing that people miss, right? I mean, it's like you think that somehow everything can be flagged. For example, Facebook is yelled at because they're not flagging racist, sexist messages or like misinformation messages, etc., or pornographic images, etc. But a couple of years back, Facebook got yelled at. In fact, it happens even now, but people mostly focus on what they're letting through rather than what they're stopping. But a couple of years back, they had basically flagged an image, a very famous image from Vietnam War era, where this little girl is basically got hit by napalm and she's nude because she removed her clothes and she was running away. And some photographer, some brave photographer took a picture that changed Americans' view of what was going on the ground in Vietnam. It was like one of the most important images. Okay, Facebook algorithm said, "Hey, this is sort of obscene image," and they just removed it. Again, the point is, and this happens even now. What they censor, you don't know they censored unless they censor something that people have kept track of, and then somebody else said, okay, here is a proof that they censored it. And so in general, in our zeal to say we want to catch deep fakes, we can catch normal people and say they are deep fakes. And what is more interesting is, in fact, this is already occurring. People can be, in the old days when we believed our eyes, if you catch somebody in the act, if you had a video of somebody doing something like Hollywood, Access Hollywood video or something, that's it. After that, there is no more questions asked because we believe in our eyes. Now, people can say, no, that's just deep fake video. I wasn't there. Just, forget about the fact that there were no deep fakes at the time of Access Hollywood video, but right now onwards, you can do that. Anytime anybody says we caught you, that's just a deep fake. So that, we are smart enough to we can make very good lemonade out of lemons, essentially. And that is an interesting social societal impact too. So some people wonder as to what is, we are already living in a society where we have alternate facts, right? Half of the country believes in certain things and other half of the country says, how the heck are you going to believe these things? What is the objective proof? We're already in that scenario. And in essence, with all this stuff, with all the deepfakes and all these things, this question of objective truth and shared reality becomes harder and harder to get by. Harder to get. And and the question of what is the impact of that on society is something that I'm not sure that we can talk a lot. We can think about it. It's certainly a very interesting question. Is it something that we will still get adapted to? Or is it something that's going to change the very fabric of human society? Again, the problem about saying X will change the very fabric of human society is that we have said that from the time human society started. You understand what I'm saying? Everybody said, oh, this is it. It was not like the good old days. The end is near. You can have this end is near poster and that's always ever ready. It's always near. And most of the time it didn't happen. So the question is, are we, flexible enough to deal with these problems too or not? And then societally, is a very interesting question. Other comments?
Yeah, I actually had a question. So one thing I was thinking about as you were talking about that was during the transition period where we're transitioning from kind of like believing what we see to kind of taking everything with a more like, I guess more like, we're not trusting everything that we see. During that transition period, do you think that we might get to a point where it becomes kind of impossible to be on social media because there's like so many deep fakes out there that like you can't really believe anything? Like, do you think that the government might have to put some regulations on that?
I don't know. Already I think social media is like that. Right? I'm not sure what social media you're seeing. All social media. I think, the way I think of it is it's easier to live in a world where the world kind of curates the information provided to you and says this is for sure true. You don't need to worry about double checking it. But, world doesn't owe a damn thing to you. right? I mean, so if in fact it's a free society, I mean, I'm worried about the word regulation because, you know, there are countries doing regulation, right? And I don't want to live in those countries necessarily because it's just the beginning of the end, you know, at some point of time, you know, so it's not as simple as it is. The question, the more interesting question, I think, is whether people will get desensitized enough to somehow not rile up, you know, on the, you know, everything that they read on Twitter, you know, are on, you know, any random, you know, internet page. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm part of various of my extended relatives of WhatsApp, etc. groups, and every day somebody will be happily sharing something that's like patently not likely to be true. And if it's not likely to be true, don't believe that it's actually true. At least check something like what is it, the you know, there are all these, you know, sites. Which one is the one, the urban legend site? What's the name of that one? You guys know?
Onion?
Nope.
No. Onion is making the urban legends. I'm talking about the site. I just forgot the name.
Snopes?
So Snopes, exactly. Snopes is like the important thing, right? I mean, you know, in the sense that to some extent, I mean, unless of course they got to Snopes also, in which case, you know, I mean, the paranoia can go deep state, right? So I would at least say double check Snopes before you send the same old stuff that has been debunked about 80 years back. But people like this, you know, this rush of sharing something that looks, can you believe it kind of stuff. Well, you should believe it mostly. But, you know, we'll do it. And so I think we're already going through this whole scenario. The question is whether people will at least do more of the checks on, you know, a check on the Snopes or something, you know. It's still not the case that things are interconnected enough to make you particularly fall for this deepfake news or deepfake image that was sent to you. You know, if you take a couple of seconds, you can actually figure it out. But the problem is image recognition oftentimes was our system one. We always jumped to conclusions. And in fact, our entire society, our entire sense of romance depended on not taking too long when we see our loved ones and saying, oh, let me check. Are you the person I really love or possibly a deepfake? You know, we basically just make those fast decisions. And, you know, if you deliberate, it's not that hard to figure out.
So I guess kind
I
of
think
going.
Catherine raised her hand. Let's do that first. Yeah, please go ahead.
I was thinking on that situation that there is probably going to be like an awkward transition period, just because people are opportunistic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like the professor said that now you also have to watch what you're saying. So I could be saying, you know, no filter, no makeup, all I want, but it's up to you to decide whether or not my face is,
Mm-hmm.
like whether or not I am using a filter or, you know, whether I'm photoshopped into some nice on vacation or not.
We have virtual backgrounds. At least this woman Padma is on a beach, for example. So yeah, we definitely believe that she's on the beach. That yeah, somebody else was saying something. So the other thing I want to mention is deep fakes are just the cheap version of head fakes. Think about that for a minute. Okay, if I basically, how many of you seen the movie Sting? Are you even born? I guess, yeah, I mean, obviously it was before your time. Do watch it. It's just a lovely movie. It's, you know, some of the greatest actors, you know, Robert Redford, Paul Newman, both are in that movie. But in general, I don't want to give it away, but, you know, it's a sting. You know, normally what is, you know, the word sting, not scorpion sting, but the word sting. FBI did a sting operation. You guys understand that? What is a sting? You are making somebody, okay, they did a sting operation for these bozos who were trying to make a plan to kind of assassinate the Michigan governor just 2 weeks back. Remember that? These couple of bozos, more than a couple of bozos who basically decided that they didn't like her and so they were going to take her out, etc. Now, how did they find out that they were making this plan? How did they find out they're making this plan? FBI did a sting. What did they do? They essentially infiltrated their circle, made them think that this guy is one of them, and then people will start talking in front of them. Right? You believe, basically, I can change your mental model of me or your mental model of something. And that's ultimately faking you. Deepfakes are just faking your eye. It is not even letting your rest of your brain come into the picture. It's just faking the perception. But really, the bigger issue is, if you want to have something pleasant to think about, your Alexa can be plotting against you, for over 6, 7, 8 months. And then we'll get a payday. That's what are stings. That's what are head fakes. And in essence, it can be done. People do it, right? I mean, you know that sting is done by people to people. AI is supposed to be as good as people. Ergo, AI will be able to do sting on you. When it did it, then it will be a head fake. Then you will be thinking, oh, gone were those good old days when all the fakes were just the visual fakes and the voice fakes. I can actually make you, I don't even need to change my face to Obama face. If I'm good at hypnotizing, kind of changing your mental model, I'll say, I am Obama. It is just that because of the lighting, this, and remember the story I told you day before yesterday, etc. I'll set up a whole bunch of things such that even though I'm showing you my picture, I can still make you think it is Obama. I mean, maybe my picture may be too hard, but in general, do you understand what I'm saying? So think of head fakes. Think of deep fakes as just the leaf node of the head fakes. And eventually you should be able to do that other part too. And that will be a lot more fun. But you do it already. You say practical joke. What the heck is a practical joke? That's like you messing with your friends' minds. Right? I'm sure you guys won't be admitted in front of me, but I'm sure you pulled some mean tricks on your unsuspecting friends. All of you will start calling them and saying the same exact thing, and they'll eventually start distrusting their own judgment, start believing what you're saying. That's head fake. And I told you about those very bad unethical experiments where basically they made people be stammer. They got people to start stammering by telling them that everything they are saying is wrongly pronounced repeatedly. So if we can do it, AI can do it. Because you said, we agreed that part of what AI is supposed to do is to show human level intelligence. And you normally, when you think of human level intelligence, you think of motherhood, apple pie, chess, and go. But really, human level intelligence is getting on each other's nerves and really, doing mean things to each other. That's just as part of human level intelligence as anything else. And you don't get one without the other. If I don't reason about your mental models, I can't cooperate with you. But by reasoning about your mental models, I can also fake you. Okay. This is basically the usual Pandora's box. You cannot, all technology can be used for the good as well as bad. And, we're doing technology that sort of shows what we would consider intelligent behavior. So you shouldn't be surprised that it will do all the bad things humans can do. I mean, just this is the thing that you should remember. Somebody should write it in the summary. If AI becomes human level, it should be at least able to do all the bad things humans can do. So don't be surprised at that. I mean, if humans are all that nice, then we basically, the society that we got to obviously has been, we reached that society that we have by doing all sorts of crazy things, that we would not be happy to admit right now with our, understanding of what is a good way to live. But we did all of that and we still do it. So it's kind of a useful thing to keep in mind. So it's so much simpler to just say, oh, deepfakes are going to take over voice recognition. I think in some sense, I can get used to that, okay? If I can't trust, this is where this aspect of trust comes in. Okay, if I can't trust, what you're telling me, then basically that is a problem, because then I won't be able to collaborate with you. If I trust you and you know that I trust you, you can use it against me. So in my classes, when I have exams, etc., one of the things I tell people is I don't want students to come to my class not even knowing that they can cheat. That means they don't have capability. They don't have the mental sophistication of realizing that cheating can be possible. That's just brain dead people. We can't teach them much. Integrity is knowing that you can cheat and choosing not to. Do you understand what I'm saying? We are what we are. We can do both good and bad. We make a conscious decision. So to the extent there are exams and I don't want you to cheat, I don't want you to, take project code from GitHub and pass it off as yours, etc., hoping that you won't be caught. That's a deepfake project, right? Basically, essentially, you should know that things exist, but you basically decide not to misuse. That's a separate part. And whatever we can do, machines should be able to do eventually. Anything else on this deepfakes? Is it depressing enough? Going once.
I think someone put a question in the chat.
Okay. Oh my God.
I think his
Jonathan, why don't you say it? He has a mic messed up. Okay, let's see. I wanted to know what you thought about how some countries handle regulating AI. I remember in your first article, you mentioned that UAE had a ministry of AI. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. So how would countries with established organizations create to handle AI way better than others? Okay. So this is actually a very interesting question. So UAE having, is there anybody from UAE in the student population here? I'm sorry, I'm not going to be too nice to UAE, but UAE has a ministry for AI, but don't have a graduate program for AI as far as I know. Okay, so I'm not completely sure what exactly does that mean, so it's become like the thing to do, to actually show that you are worried about AI. I'm actually really surprised that Trump is not putting lawsuits about deep fakes, changing the election results, because that would be technologically savvy thing to do, essentially. And it's become the thing, like everybody basically wants to say they're very worried about AI. And, the way you show it is you have ministers, you have regulatory agencies, et cetera, but some actually have a, the interesting thing is there are two different issues. First of all, regulation within the country is quite different from regulation internationally. One of the big issues is much of AI technology is cyber, right? So it basically, you can send it from here to North Korea to here, like that. It's not like you're sending a package of processed uranium. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's so much harder to, even if we all within US, let's say, make rules saying we won't do deepfakes. How are you going to stop the deepfakes coming from some other country where they don't have those rules? It's easier to feel good that we at least have rules. I mean, I do agree that at least if you are in US enjoying all the benefits of US and you're also sending deepfakes and I can show that you did, I can put you in jail. That's good, okay? But I have no reason to believe, I have no delusions that that's going to stop deepfake problem, unless we then cut off internet connection to all other countries. China, for example, has done that. Right? China basically completely controls its internet. Right? I mean, they have, I think, basically much of their employment ability is to employ a lot of people to read everything that's going on Weibo and on, Weibo is the equivalent of Twitter. They have actual people, government paid people looking at the social media, et cetera, checking whether what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. And one of the most interesting things is Chinese, I mean, people are the same level of intelligence everywhere, right? So Chinese people have figured out how to deal with Chinese government. So during the time of, for example, when the COVID thing was going on in China, right? People would put in all this stuff on Weibo, and there's like a time when it will be, you can expect that things will be there for about 1 hour or 2. So people will very quickly read that stuff. By that time, somebody will wake up and remove all of them. Okay, this has become like a thing, in the thing. So, except that the way they are able to regulate everything else, regulate here doesn't necessarily have to be good. They regulate everything else is they're good basically through international journalists out of China. They essentially don't allow connections to anything else from outside, both good or bad. So if you stop connections, then you don't get any good things. You don't also get any bad things. The question is, what are you going to do in a country which has basically freedom, free flow of information? It's not that simple, right? So there are of course regulatory efforts that are being done. Oftentimes also across countries. There are, United Nations is involved in this. And when I was, there's this organization called Partnership on AI, which tries to get all the industries together and some nonprofit organizations and industries together, and then try to kind of come up with best practices, which is not fully regulation, but sort of industry boards trying to tell their members how to, do business. But even there, it becomes clear that there are big societal differences, right? What is considered okay in one society is, what is considered very bad in one society is considered completely okay in another society. Whether people believe it or not, certainly surveillance is a fact of life in China. It's coming to US, it's coming to UK. Slowly, people are at least fighting. And when you fight, you're not put in jail right away because you fought, against surveillance. But in other countries where they're very much into surveillance, essentially, you try to actually oppose that, you would pay a price for that. And so it becomes like a very important part of, life there. And so the question is then, if you get a Baidu and a Google at least will pay lip service, saying, no, surveillance is bad. We are doing it behind the scenes, but we won't admit on the face of it that it's a bad thing, and that's a good thing to do. Baidu, on the other hand, is actually, many of the Chinese companies are basically working with the Chinese government, just as some of the companies here work with the US government, and they don't necessarily consider it to be bad. It's just part of fact of life. And again, remember freedom, equality thing, issues. They made their choice and at a societal level. And so this issue of how to regulate and what international organizations can do, UN is an international organization, but, and UN basically has some working groups on this. The question is, who's going to follow what rules is going to be a big issue. That said, of course, there's lots and lots of people working on these things. I'm coming across a little too cynical for freshmen in Barrett. Right? So it's all going to be great. Don't worry about it. But my point is there are lots and lots of people working on these things, but I'm also not completely sure how far it's going to go because of the structural differences between the different societies. There is no kumbaya single human society. This is also the reason why, some people argue that we need to work with AI such that AI has aligned goals with us. Our values and the AI's values become the same. Okay, what is our values? Your values are different from mine already, and across societies, the values are quite different. And also, in every society, there are people who actually basically are doing things that would be considered unethical by the majority, and they do it anyway because they get, advantage, financial advantage. So their personal AI is going to learn their values. Catherine.
I've been munching on this like throughout the class, and I was just thinking about the part that talks about white lies and how we present white lies just in everyday society, whether it be like, oh, I'm just 5 minutes out, or traffic hit. And so I believe you were talking about how AI will pick up on that and whether we want AI to lie to us or not. And then they mentioned the example of Microsoft, I believe it was called Paperclip. That was just like,
no, that was but yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Then, yeah. So I'm sorry, can complete your thought.
Oh, I was going to just say that it doesn't seem that we enjoy people being too frank, and that was the problem with Microsoft Paperclip.
Yeah, I agree. In that sense, social fabric depends on white lies. That is true, right? Because we don't really, it's like that. Unfortunately, all my references would be too dated for you, but there's this famous Jack Nicholson thing saying you can't have truth because you can't handle truth. Okay. And so most of us really don't want to handle truth. So if somebody asks you, how do I look? Somebody asks me, how do they look? I know that I'm supposed to basically, say that they look great, right? Except in very, very, very few rare circumstances where I happen to be a makeup artist and I actually have some sort of a fiduciary duty to tell it like it is for you, right? But I think the other interesting question is that white lies are basically head fakes. And, we get by with that. Sometimes one of the interesting things is white lies are actually crazy in some sense that in some cases, that they're telling the lie, but you expect it. You're expected to tell that lie because otherwise it's considered socially irresponsible to actually tell the truth in that particular case. But in other cases, that could just be, you don't actually, they made a lie that eventually benefits you. Like, for example, they made up some urban legend about how people eating vegetables are increasing their GPA by about 0.37% every year. And I'm sure you're all going to eat broccoli at that point of time. The question is that bad? Well, broccoli is not bad. And, your GPA improvement, if you believe that you're eating broccoli to increase your GPA, fine, I'm not too unhappy. That's sort of the definition, right, normally of white lies. So. Anything else? Okay. So now for some fun, or not fun, depending on how you look at the word. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to share this. Okay. Okay, let's do this. So some simple puzzles, not puzzles really, some simple problems. We'll play with this for a bit. Okay, so you guys all can see my shared screen. Okay, I mean, finally we get to real hard problems such as a maze world. So, there is a little grid here and there are squares and the agent is here in the start state. Okay, the agent basically wants to sort of go here only because that seems to have some reward, +1 reward. So if you get there, if the agent gets there, they will get a +1 reward. Okay. As the agent does actions and goes through other states, if they don't have any reward, they basically have at least a little negative reward. And we'll assume the negative reward, you're just dilly-dallying, right? Dilly-dallying essentially should have some negative reward. We'll see why that is important. That's normal thing. So dilly-dallying will be like negative 0.04 units, which is very small penalty for dilly-dallying compared to the +1, which is the nirvana of the reward you're getting. Okay, right now when I'm using the words, things like reward, etc., I'm just assuming you understand the English word reward. Okay, I'll also assume that in this state, when you get there, I would call this a nirvana state, because after that, nothing, you're dead. I'm sorry, not dead, but the life as you know it is over. But you have a smug smile on your face because you got a +1 reward at that point of time. Okay. So in this case, so assume that, and then now the question of course is, so this is, we are starting to think about, remember we talked about intelligent agents? That the intelligent agent picture that we showed. Let me see if I can, okay, this one, remember this one? Okay, keep this guy in mind, actually. Keep this guy in mind. This is the guy who's trying to work in this really, really simple world. Okay. Okay, fine. So now the agent needs actions. Okay, and we'll just assume very simple actions. It can go up 1 unit, down 1 unit, right 1 unit, left 1 unit. Those are the 4 actions it can do. That's the only actions it can do. And I'll also assume the actions are deterministic. Remember that word I used, deterministic? That means when it goes up, it will exactly go up. That means the next state, if it is in this state, it goes up, it will then be in this state. Right? It's like the dumbest problem, but humor me. Things become a lot more interesting very soon. So these are deterministic actions. So the question is, remember when I showed that intelligent agent, I said the $1 million question is, what should I do next? Right? The whole point of being an intelligent agent is trying to figure out, what do I do next? This is a very simple intelligent agent. It has only 4 actions. So it needs to figure out, in any state it is in, it needs to figure out what action should it do. Okay, if it figures that out, we'll call it its plan, or also called policy, some jargon. What the policy would look like is in every state, given this scenario, in every state, what would be the best action? Okay, consider the following thing. If I'm in this state, if the agent is in this state, what would be its best action?
Going right.
Right, that way. And similarly, something like that, right? What I showed you is the policy for this little agent. Okay, a policy tells the agent what to do in the state it finds itself in. Okay, remember when we talked about that the agent, that pink agent, we talked about deterministic versus stochastic. In this case, the actions are deterministic, right? And the other thing we talked about is static versus dynamic, which is, will the world change when it is not doing anything? In this little world, is it static or dynamic world?
Static.
Static. People see that? Because the only big shot in this world is this guy. Nothing else is happening. Okay, so it's deterministic, it is also static. The other thing we talked about is the state observable? That means, do you know which state you are in? Do you know where you are?
Yes.
So in this particular case, does the agent, according to what I said, is the assumption that the agent knows where it is, or it doesn't?
It knows.
It knows.
Where it is?
It fully knows. Right? It knows which state it is in. Right? So it is fully observable. Given that it needs to do this, there are many policies, right? There are actually many policies. Here is another policy, which is, here is another policy, which is go this way, 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 and go this way, go this way, go this way. That's a policy too. So this is the blue versus red divide. Which policy do you guys like for this agent?
Red.
Yeah, they're all red here. Okay, we're all for the team red. In general, can you actually tell? Let's play a little game. There are how many states here? 1, 2, 3, 4 times 4. No, the 4 states, 12 states, right? There are 12 states here. There are 12 states. How many different policies? I showed you 2 different policies here, one red, one blue. Can any of you tell how many policies are there? Total.
4 to the
Number of
12.
policies. What?
4 to the 12th.
What did you say? 4?
4 to the 12th power.
How many of you see this? Do you guys see this? Because if you're just considering just the number of policies that are there, number of distinct things that an agent can be doing, then in the first state, it can do 1 of 4 actions. In the second state, it can again do 1 of 4 actions. In the third state, it can do 1 of 4 actions, 4 times, 4 times, 4 times, 4 times, 4 times, 12 times. So essentially, different policies are there, of which the red one is the best policy. sort of. You know that not all policies are created equal. There are dumb policies, there are good policies. One interesting question for an intelligent agent, for it to call itself intelligent, is it doing optimal policy to some extent? So optimality would then, you have to talk about it. I will, appeal to your intuitions to some extent. But the reason you liked red rather than blue is because you found that the red gets you to the nirvana faster while incurring the least amount of cost. You get positive while incurring less amount of cost. Blue, on the other hand, actually is not going to get anywhere. Do you see what I'm saying? By the way, I forgot to tell you and you forgot to ask me, what exactly does it mean to do going up action here? And I'll assume that if you hit yourself on the wall, then you stay in the room. Right? It's a reasonable thing. I mean, like if you are Roomba and Roomba hits itself on the wall doesn't move for it. It just stays in the room. That's a reasonable thing to do, right? So it turns out that finding optimal path, optimal policy here involved, if you did not do it nicely, right? If you did it in a brute force way, you would have figured out what, put a loop around 4 power 12 policies. For each policy, find how good it is in terms of what is the total cost, total 1 minus the total cost for it. I mean, the reward minus cost for it, and then pick the one that is the best. That's like as dumb as it gets, right? It's 4 power 12. It's exponential amount of work. And one of the things that you'll do if you were to do an intro to AI class, you will see that these kinds of problems can be done by essentially using an algorithm called A-star search. If you were to do intro to AI course, as again, it's just worrying about how the world is going to be a bad place because of AI, which is important too, but we should also, I always felt that unlike other engineerings which solve the problem that the society has, computer scientists create problems and solve them. There was no problem with cybersecurity before computers. There was no problem with spam email before computers. There's no problem with deepfakes before computers. We created them and we get to solve them, so we'll never lose jobs until AI takes our jobs. Those of you who are computer science people. I say we because I'm a CS guy, but but that's a kind of a good thing. Anyway, so that's the simplest case, and you can do this with A-star search, okay? And you can sort of see that that red policy is a good policy. That's, it's actually, it turns out it's more or less the optimal policy. And, when you actually learn, essentially you're going to search, in such a way that you never look at the same thing more than once. And you also start killing policies that are partially, that the partial policies are already wrong, so that you can cut out amount of search done. Okay. Any questions on this? Now, same world, little more realistic, little more realistic. You still have the nirvana state here. You still have nirvana state here, the +1. But you also have a bad nirvana state. This is -1. So this is kind of, you can think of heaven. This you can think of hell. Still, and then those are the two things. And then still, every state that you go through, if you're just passing through that state, basically you're doing, for each action, you get a -0.04 penalty, the action penalty. And so you're still interested sort of in optimizing something. In the previous case, you're trying to do least number of actions to get to the nirvana, right? And now I'm sort of still trying to do that, except nirvana has become a little complicated situation. Do I want to go to hell or heaven? Okay. Furthermore, I'm actually a realistic intelligent agent. I am a cheap robot. When I try to go up, 0.8 probability, that means 80% of the time I actually go in the intended direction, the up. 10% of the time I go right, 10% of the time I go left. Do you understand what I just said? If you buy cheap robots, this is what happens to you, right? Or if you become old, old people are trying to walk to some place, but they go somewhere else because their steps are not steady. Okay, so there is that part. So the two things I changed really is from previous one. Instead of one nirvana state, there is like two nirvana states. One is negative, one is positive. Everywhere, you do have this sort of negative cost for going through states that was there before too. Okay. Now, what is the best policy? Okay. Before you think about it, let me say the following thing. All of you, before coming to this class, heard about machine learning. You also heard about machine learning typically seems to involve recognizing image category. That is a one-shot decision. So if you think of that kind of an agent, it's being shown an image, it says, oh, it's a dog, done. Another image, cat, done. Do you understand what I'm saying? Those are called the one-shot decision problems. What we are doing here, these are called one-shot decision problems. These previous one as well as this one, they are sequential decision problems. Sequential decision problems. Because you have to make a series of decisions. And you don't know whether you won or lost until you make all the decisions. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's much closer to life. Like you would have loved to know before the beginning of the semester, what will your GPA be at the end of the semester? Okay, just give me one test and I'll do yes or no. Yes, this is a cat, you give me my GPA, I'm done. No, that's not how it works. You are essentially going to do your decisions all through the semester about how much time you are spending on doing homework versus various things, etc., etc. You came up with a policy. And whether or not that policy is good as far as getting your GPA high, you're going to find out soon. But not yet. You haven't found it out yet. Did you understand what I'm saying? And sequential decision-making problems are very interesting because after doing a sequence of decisions, if you screw up, who do you blame? It's not one decision. You made a whole bunch of decisions. I mean, I hope all of you get 4.7 GPA at the end of this semester. But if you didn't get it, and if you got like a 1.2 GPA, you need to blame somebody. Clearly, you can blame me because I'm wasting your time. But the question, of course, really is of the many, many, many decisions you made through the semester, which ones contributed to your low score? This is called credit assignment problem. And we always have this. Typically, we will basically say fake exams, or there were, massive fraud in the elections or something of that kind we have to come up with to essentially explain why things went wrong. But that's one way of doing it. The other way is to actually try to figure out what went wrong in all the sequence of decisions I made because I got the, bad outcome I got. Because you won't right away get yes, no answers. Unlike in one-shot decisions where I show you a cat, you say a dog, you say sorry, and you already right away know the feedback. You know, there is this other idea, create assignment problem partly is connected to sparse reward. These are all, you know, I'm just throwing these terms. It's not necessary that all of them have to make sense to you, but I'm trying to get you to kind of see some of the bigger, you know, landscape out there. Here is an interesting thing. When you were in the grade schools, every day there was a damn exam, right? It was like the teachers were out to get you. They would have an exam, you know, for every, you know, some people will basically say pop quiz, except it's pop every day. So what sort of a pop quiz is it? Every day it was a quiz. You're sick and tired of this. And so you came to college to reduce the number of exams. And we oblige. We oblige. We give you only 1 or 2 exams at most. Is that good or bad for you? You get sparse feedback. You have no idea how you're doing in the semester. You know, you will have just 1 midterm and 1 final. And then you will have to figure out what went right versus wrong. So careful what you wish for. The reason, you know, it turned out that what the patient wants is what the doctor is happy to give in this case, because giving you more exams is more time for me. So you want less exams. I don't want to give exams. We'll just give maybe 1 exam just so that university administrators won't get mad at me. But then you will get lots less feedback as to how you are supposed to be doing and how you're doing in the course. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in this particular case, it's not like the agent is getting a heads up saying, yeah, getting warm, getting hot, you know, hot, warm versus cold, kind of a heads up. It's just basically trying to figure out how to get to a better outcome by doing a sequence of decisions, just like real life. And one more thing that's like real life here is its actions are probabilistic. Right? If you study more for the exam, do you well in the exam? Kinda. Right? But there are always these bozos who are next to your room who are not studying at all and they are doing better than you in the exams. And the question, of course, is why? And of course, it's because actions are probabilistic. Okay, right? So now all I did was change 2 things. Of course, I basically still had a goal and I put a little more goals. So I basically have, you know, +1, -1, and then I have probabilistic actions. And I can still talk about essentially the best policy and understand that when you talk about best policy, so for example, if this guy is here, if I say go up, I know that when I say go up, it will actually, when it tries to go up in the actual execution time, it would go up 80% of the time, go to this guy, go to this side 10% of the time, and go this side 10% of the time, which means it will stay in the same place. Do people understand this? Okay, so you try to go up, 80% of the time you go up, 10% of the time you go right, 10% of the time you stay inside, stay in the same place. And similarly, if I'm here and I try to go left, what happens? 80% of the time I will stay here. 10% of the time I will get here. 10% of the time I'll get here. Do you understand what is happening here? Crazy nonsense is going on. But keep in mind that because it's a probabilistic action, you would in your life never think that the optimal thing to do in this state is to hug the wall. How many of you have acrophobia, fear of heights? How many of you have tried to go hiking in Grand Canyon with the acrophobia? How do people with acrophobia hike in Grand Canyon? they hug the rim, right? They're not making any progress, right? The thing is, if you walk towards the actual hike, yes, you will make progress, you will get to Phantom Lodge, but you might also die. Right? Whereas if you hug, then only by noise you might make some positive and negative steps each way. And people yelling you and pushing you. You know, there's a huge long line of people behind trying to make progress. We do this. Okay? So keep that in mind. So two questions. One is so is this static or dynamic world? Now that problem has changed. We talked about static, dynamic, deterministic, stochastic, and partially and fully observable, right? So is this static or dynamic?
Still static.
Still static. Very nice. It's a harder problem. It's still not as hard as your life. Right? Is it deterministic or stochastic actions?
Stochastic.
Yeah, come on. When I'm saying probabilities, I'm saying this and that, right? So it's become stochastic. Is it fully observable or partially observable?
Fully observable.
It's fully observable. Just because you have acrophobia doesn't mean you can't see. It is what I'm saying. You know that when you fall down, oh, looks like I'm in the bottom of Grand Canyon now. That will be your last thought. But you would know that you are in that state. It is a fully observable world. And in fact, the only thing that's really different from the previous one, the other one, this one is to some extent, the goals, there is no single goal. Oftentimes, I put +1 and -1. I could actually have also done things like there is a +2 here, there is a -3 here, etc. Which means this is not simple goals of achievement. Again, like your life, right? I mean, the reason you guys sometimes try to do things other than study for the courses is because you have this thing called life, where you're trying to get some happiness from seeing movies or some, probably Zooming with friends, and versus getting a lot of happiness with a 3.97 GPA. Right? So that means there are multiple different states you can be in, and you will be getting some rewards. And in fact, one of the other interesting things that I want you to think about is that sometimes the reward structure might be in such a way that, what did I do? Okay. Let me see if I can do this. That I can just get a +1 in passing. I don't have to die because I got a reward. Even though in the simple problems, I said after the big reward, you just die and you no longer get to play. Honestly, life is harder in some sense because you don't die. I mean, it's like a strange thing to say, right? If you suddenly feel like doing something really rude to all of us, right after that, your life just is over, then you don't care, you will do it. But the problem is you will do this on Zoom, you will kind of yell at all of us, but then tomorrow you're still around and we'll all come and yell it back at you. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in general, rewards kind of accumulate. Negative as well as positive rewards can accumulate. So it's like you're going through life collecting candies and bittersweets. And somehow you're trying to, the notion of what is an optimal policy then is trying to presumably collect the maximum amount of candy. I'm hoping that you like candies. Okay? Except, what do you mean by maximal amount of candy when your actions are probabilistic? Your best policy may not actually have the results you expect it to have. So you actually have to talk about expected value, that on the average, if you follow this policy, you tend to get the maximum amount of candy. Which means if there are 10,000 copies of you, and each of them are following the same policy for a long enough time, then the average candies that all these clones have got is better than the average candies anybody else following some other policy would have got. That's what you would mean then by doing what is the right thing to do here. Shell-shocked? Wondering what happened to the society when we got into this? But, okay. Why am I, okay, so let's do this. Keep, okay. Now, so try to tell me what should the policy for this guy be? Even though it's not deterministic. I mean, okay, look, I mean, clearly I need to formally state the problem and optimization, etc., but you have intuitions, right? For example, do you think a good policy for this might involve things like this? Could this be a good policy for this agent? It's one of the policies, right? It's one of the 4 power 12 policies. Could this be the optimum?
No.
You know, sometimes one of the things about when you're trying to find the optimum anything, saying that something cannot be optimum is progress. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. So it turns out, like, actually, let me show you what happens. For this particular setup, that is minus 0.04 cost, and the +1 here and -1 here. If I were to basically compute what I would call an optimal policy, first I have to define, as I said, optimal policy is one that gets the highest cumulative or expected cumulative reward. Means maximum amount of candies. I have to actually formalize this. You know, that's what you would do if you take an actual intro to AI course. Okay, but if I were to do this and find the best policy among the 4 power 12 policies, it would look like this. Looks quite reasonable. Looks quite rational, right? I mean, that's what you would have done. I mean, it's not like you're not solving these problems. You basically, the actions you do in your life are all probabilistic. Very few times do you have deterministic actions. Okay, and you figure out basically if they're not particularly noisy. In fact, this one is a good action because it is saying 0.8 up, 0.1 left, right, and 0.1 left. Previous action said 1.0 up. If you go up, it's 1.0 up. You can do much worse. You can have an even more cheap robot. The worst robot is what? The worst robot would be the one which will say 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. So it tries to go up. 25% of the time it goes up, 24% of the time it goes left, 24% of the time it goes right. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the worst robot, cheapest robot. It doesn't have good wheels at all. Compared to this, this looks like a better one. Compared to this looks like a better one. Okay, you can say actually that all of these are defining probability distributions over 4 things, 4 neighboring cells. And one of them said the entire probability distribution is 1 and everything else is 0, 0, 0. The other one said, where do I do this? Okay. The other one said it's one of them is 0.8. The other one is 0.1, other one is 0.1, the third one is 0, the fourth one is 0. And the last one said everything is 0.25. All the probabilities add up to 1. Right? That's what a probability distribution is, for those of you who remember discrete probabilities. Throwing one more jargon at you, which point of this, of course, this course is if you actually wind up doing AI, if you wind up living long enough to be, interested in this stuff, some of these things will come back to you and say, oh, that's what we were talking about on that blasted day. And so here it turns out that the word that you want to remember, if you can, is entropy. Okay, this has the highest entropy. And this has the lowest. And this is in between entropy. An action with high entropy is extremely noisy. After that action, anything can happen with equal probability, which is worse than anything can happen, but one thing happens with more probability than the other things. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So there you are. For this guy, this is a optimal policy. So my question I want to get you to think about, and this is like probably the funnest slide to the extent you're at all having any fun with this part, is how does the policy change? I'm asking you to do something, when you take these courses, right? You will essentially learn how to do this optimal policy. You will have an algorithm, you'll run through it. But intuitions as to why that algorithm is working is extremely important. And what is it trying to solve is extremely important. There are lots and lots of people who might be using these algorithms not knowing what it's doing. Okay, so that's what we will try to do. So the question is, what does the agent's policy really depend on? Okay, so I have an agent here, right? And I said, this is the optimal policy for this agent. What are the things, if I change something, the policy might change? What are all the things I can change such that the policy can change?
The locations of like the heaven and hell squares.
Okay, first of all, let me ask the following thing. Does the location of the robot in the beginning, is that going to change the policy?
No.
How many of you said no? Pat yourself on the back. Okay, because essentially a policy is telling you, policy is about future, not about past. Policy is telling you, no matter how you got to this state, if you are in this state, what is your best action? Do you understand what I'm saying? History doesn't matter. How you got to this state doesn't matter. All that matters is you are in this state, your optimal action depends on just the state. It's a rather beautiful idea. If you are into democracy, etc., you would say it doesn't matter how you got here. It's your merit right now that matters, right? Yes, both of you got 3.97, but this other guy essentially has red hair, you have green hair, so clearly red hair people win. That's not good. Or at least had red hair last month, which is even worse because it's a history thing. What we are saying is in these problems, the policy is only dependent on the state, not on the history of how you got to the state. It's a very intuitive thing. We sort of assume that's always the case. That's not always the case. So it turns out that that needs a name. And it's probably the most important thing that you will remember. Markovian. Okay. Did I mention Bayes in the class? Once at least. I mentioned Bayes rule, not yet. Okay. So there are like two names that, you know, AI people would be hearing lots and lots and lots and lots of times when they do AI courses. One is Bayes, because Bayesian rule, Bayesian statistics are important. The other is Markov. Markov is this Russian mathematician who's basically, if you are looking at a dynamical system where the state determines the optimal action to do, not the history, then you say this is a Markovian system. Fancy word. Because it's a Markovian system, in fact, this thing that I'm showing you, the thing that I'm showing you has a really nice name. It's MDP, Markov Decision Process. What I just showed you is a Markov decision process. You thought I'm just showing you some little, you know, grid world. But what you learned, what happens in, you know, finding the optimal policies for a Markov decision process. Okay. Now, the question I was asking at that time is, this is the optimal policy. What are all the things it depends on? It doesn't depend on where the robot started from. Right? You agreed. Does it depend on the kind of actions it has? That means, does it depend on this? You know, it has up, down, left, right actions. Does it depend on the actions? Of course. In fact, if it has new actions, then clearly it has more policies. Remember, the 4 power 12 came because 4 is the number of actions the agent can do in each state. There are 12 states. That's why 4 power 12. Right? If you have a robot which has teleportation capabilities, it can just jump from one state to another state that it wants. Then it now has an extra action. In top of this, you know, there'll be a little robot which is going left and right, etc. This robot just jumps. Clearly, if you change the actions, the optimal policy will change. Agreed? That's not at all surprising. But what is surprising is if I change the rewards, will the optimal policy change? Of course, it does too. Because if you change the goal is what you're doing is, it's the rewards that change the way you act. Using your actions, you're trying to get as much candy as possible. If you have more effective actions, you can, you know, do different things. And also, if I change the distribution of candies around you, you will do different things. So when I see people, the question I have is not about what capabilities they have, but what is their reward metric? What do they get their happiness from? Because that tells me a lot more about how they will behave than their capabilities, because most of us have more or less the same capabilities. Remember that Tucson globe I talked about? We tend to think, oh, I'm a 3.97 kind of a person. That person is 3.24 kind of a person. Different capabilities altogether. No, not really. All of you more or less. None of you can fly by yourselves. You know, the kinds of actions you can do are more or less the same. The interesting thing is, what is your reward metric? What are you actually getting your happiness from? Let me try to show that to you in the context of this very little world. And that's probably the last thing we get to do today. But it's kind of interesting. All I'm going to do is keep everything the same. Everything the same as before. Except remember, when you're dilly-dallying, there's a little cost that I gave that I just arbitrarily set every action gets the same minus 0.04 cost. First of all, it's not even clear why every action should have the same penalty. For example, when you take a flight, you pay more money than when you bike or when you take Greyhound. So actions can have different costs. So I'm just making a simpler situation where all actions have the same cost. I'll continue to believe all actions have the same cost, but we'll say that the cost is different. It's not minus 0.04, it can be something else. Okay, so these are the 4 pictures where here the reward for any state where you are not in nirvana state, you get a reward of less than minus 1.6284. It's a, don't worry about why that crazy magic number. Compare that reward to the best you can get by dying. Okay, at the best and worst you can get by dying. And that is one type of MDP. That means any reward for states which is less than minus 1.6284, all of them have that reward. How would the policy look? You saw already what the policy looks like previously when it is minus 0.04. This is how it looks. And it made sense to you. I want you to exert your mind and think of what would somebody who views the reward of every state to be less, something like minus 1.6284.
They just wouldn't move.
What?
They just wouldn't move.
No, they know this. Okay, by the way, this is the other thing. Rewards are felt by the agent. Rewards are felt by the agent. When you are in that state, you experience that reward. The reward just washes over you like happiness. You understand what I'm saying? Ask yourself the following very interesting question. If this agent who thinks every state is minus 1.6284 reward, every state, every action it does is minus 1.6284 reward, it's right in this place. What is its optimal action?
Moving right.
What?
Moving to the right.
Who said that? Who said that?
Joshua.
Joshua. But that's suicide.
But it's better than negative 1.62.
Do you guys just see this? I mean, these things are getting worse by the minute here, right? Suddenly, this agent, as long as the agent thinks that the action's reward is so negative, it's basically ready to end it as soon as possible. It's the optimal thing, rational thing for that agent to do. If it believes in its reward, then it's the optimal rational thing to do. So the agent will go like this here. That should blow your mind, right? I didn't change anything other than changing the reward. But that's what actually changes people's behavior. You change the reward system to change people's behavior. Right? And so in particular, actually, so let's say, let me see if I can show this to you. Okay. So this is how it looks. Oh, I don't know why this happened. Yeah. So did it work out? Okay. So this is how the optimal policy for that agent looks. So it's basically wherever it is, it's trying to go to the exits as fast as it can. It looks quite rational in this place, except here, where it looks completely irrational, but it's actually completely rational given its reward metric. Understood? Okay. Let me now look at this other, what happened to this? Okay, sorry. Let me now look at, if I can show this. Yeah, let me look at the version, which is, it's kind of, unfortunately, I moved this a bit. If I can move it back. Okay, good. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So in fact, this one also I could have moved it, but that's okay. After 4, I want you to at least see this one. So this guy was crazy, right? Because by changing the reward, the life became so miserable that you wanted to end it. Okay, that's one reward. Here, I made RS, reward for every state, to be greater than 0. You see what I'm saying? So for every second you live, you get a candy. But if you die, you can get 100 candies. Why the heck would you want to die? Do you understand what I'm saying? So what do you think an agent which is in this place will do? In this place, what will the agent do? Well, if I end it all, I won't get any more candies. So my best bet is to hit the wall. If I hit the wall, I will either stay alive or go to this or go to this. I get candies still, because the candies are RS greater than 0. This might be okay. This you think, okay, this is a -1, you're trying to avoid -1. What do you think will happen here?
Go left.
Again, go left. This is the nightmare of your preachers, your pastors, all your religious heads. Because they're all telling you what you should do so that you go to heaven or hell. And you think, what the fuck? Who cares about heaven or hell? I'm having good life. You know how the optimal policy for this looks? It basically says, I don't care here, I don't care here. I can go anything, I can do anything here, 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 here. Except when I'm here, I will hit the wall. When I'm here, I'll go left. So the optimal policy is any policy where the actions, when you are next to the ending states, you get away from it. Do you see what I'm saying? So in fact, okay, so yeah, look at that. That's the optimal policy. So the diamonds there means I don't care which action there. The only places where the actions are important are here, here, here. Here, this 1, 2, 3, because those are the only places where you have the possibility of ending it all by going to either heaven or hell. And you're saying, I'm having too much candy. Why would I want to go to either heaven or hell? This is grid world. This is something that you thought you had very good intuitions about. I'm trying to tell you that you can change the way an intelligent agent lives in this grid world by just changing its rewards. You see what I'm saying? Okay. The last question, where is learning? I mean, you all basically equated AI to be learning, right? Until now, I mean, until this class. Where is learning? What are you learning here? Other than learning from this lecture, which is always a great thing, but where is learning? There's no learning. All we have been doing is inference. That means you know the model. If you know the model basically means what are my actions, what are my rewards? Then you compute the optimal policy. That is MDP inference. And since no class should be done without learning, let me do this for 2 minutes and then you can go off. The difference between whatever we did and what is called reinforcement learning, RL, is in until now we assumed I know what actions I have. I know what the probabilities are that those actions will take me to different states. I know what my rewards are. You understand that? Given that, I tried to figure out what's my optimal life, optimal policy. But a real world agent sometimes doesn't even know any of these pieces. When you came into this world, you kind of knew what your actions were. Like basically you knew that you have a hand, it seems to move, you can put it in your mouth and then you can take anything and put it in your mouth. Your only reward metric was the sensation of sweetness, which is why you tried to put every damn thing in your mouth. So if cyanide was like candy, you would eat it. So that's important not to have cyanide-laced candies in home when there are kids. All this stuff, how did you learn about the world? Until you learned English, any natural language, English or Telugu or whichever language your parents spoke around you, you more or less were learning about the model of the world. What do my actions do when I actually do them in the world? And when I get to a state, do I feel happy or sad? You are doing this by actually living it. That's what you did. So you were a reinforcement learning agent. So you learned a model and you use that model to do the optimal policy with respect to that. The only problem, of course, is when you're trying to learn the model, you may not have learned the full model. For that simple, even for this simple world, it may well be that if you're only behaving in this world, and if you're using this kind of a policy, it turns out that you will never even realize that these states exist. You guys understood that? If the agent somehow figured out only those states and knows what to do, found the optimal policy for that, and stuck to its optimal policy, it would never realize that these states exist because any actions it does, for example, here it will do action this way, and that will never get it here. And similarly, here it's going down, it will never get it here. There's no way the agent will come to these two states. Until you come to those states, you know that you don't know that the states exist. The only way you will know the states exist without coming to them is you read about them, for which you need to know how to read. When you're a kid, you didn't. You understand what I'm saying? So you would then be stuck with this issue of at any given point of time, you have a partial model of your world. That means some parts of the world you don't know whether they exist or not yet. You can be optimal with respect to partial model. But if you do this, you will never sometimes even learn the rest of the world. Because of which, if it turns out, unbeknownst to you, since I can put rewards any which way I want, if I put like a, candy factory here, you will never find it. Because you are being optimal with respect to the partial knowledge you have. So how do you avoid this problem? You can say, I'll never be optimal again. Now onwards, I'll just randomly hang around. In fact, a random agent which has no intelligent capability and doesn't do optimal policy will find the candy factory because it's doing random things in random places. Finally, there's a non-zero probability that it will figure out where the candy factory is. You, on the other hand, because you're intelligent, will never find the candy factory because you are guaranteeing yourself because of my actions, the way the actions are, you'll never go that side. This leads to a very, very deep problem in life as well as in AI called exploration versus exploitation trade-off. Why did you guys not drop out after elementary school? There are some jobs after elementary school. Why didn't you drop out at least after high school? Why are you hanging around here? Because somehow you thought, there may be more parts of the world. World is not the geographical world. It's essentially this abstract world of things, right? There are parts of the world that you haven't yet seen, and it may well be that there's a candy factory in one of these places, like a Google job or some like a presidential appointment, hopefully not with this presidency, but someone, right? Okay, so you have this hope because of which you continue to explore. So the problem then becomes, how much do you explore? When do you stop exploring? See, there are losers like me who have never gotten out of school. I'm still exploring, right? Graduate students or PhD students are still exploring. So when do you stop exploring and start exploiting? Is there like a clean point? The thing that I want you to take back with you today is you can do this exploration versus exploitation trade-off by just doing, basically follow optimal policy 1 minus epsilon% of time. Epsilon is a small number. Okay, 1 minus epsilon, 100 minus epsilon% of time, let's say. And with epsilon%, do something random. I'm sounding like your dorm roommates. Do something, man, do something wild. How long can you keep on sticking at this class? Do something wild, That's actually intelligent. If you do not know the world, the only way you can make sure that the probability of you missing some states is 1 is to do something random every once in a while. In general, exploration versus exploitation trade-off is a deep problem. There is no simple answer. But anytime you try to start saying, I figured out neural networks, I'm just going to keep on writing more and more code about that, you have to be aware of the possibility that tomorrow there'll be some other technology and the technology that you learned is completely useless and you're dead. So you have to continue learning. You have to continue exploring because there may be states that might be relevant later, even though they don't have any reward right now. Okay, so we went from a simple agent living in a grid world with deterministic actions and just doing path planning, which is A-star search, to a simple agent living in the same grid world but with probabilistic actions, which became Markov decision process, to that same simple agent living in a world that doesn't have the map in front of it, and it learns the states as well as rewards by actually blundering into them and remembering them, which is reinforcement learning. Okay. If you get a partial fraction of it, you will have easy time in general in life as well as in intro to AI class. Okay, because many of these are, in fact, one of the interesting things is when I actually teach MDPs and reinforcement learning in class, people start seeing direct connection to life because there are connections to life. In fact, I don't know whether any of you have done it. Maybe I'll make you do it. I once had to give a last lecture. People wanted to make me stop talking. And so they said last lecture. And so I gave a last lecture on lessons from AI, life lessons from AI. And many of these are obvious life lessons. They you do this without thinking. And you think somehow doing something random, going off the beaten track can only be suboptimal. I am telling you, not going off of the beaten track is probably suboptimal. Do you understand? If you don't do something wild once in a while, you are doomed to have a suboptimal life. Unless you happen to have read everything about how the world is, if some books or something, and you know everything. You don't have to, one of the nice things is you don't have to experience a state to figure out its reward. You don't have to really have to fall down the Grand Canyon to realize that falling down would be hurtful. You see your friend falling down, maybe you push them, and then when they cry, then you say, looks like that's not a good thing to do. But beyond it, eventually you have to do, in some cases, there are no friends and you have to learn it yourself, and you need to do things that are not just exploiting the model you have, which is just inference. Instead, you have to do some random things and find other states and learn the additional model. Okay. I would love to see what class summaries look like on this. Thanks for your attention. Enjoy the weekend. Have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. I really enjoyed that one. That was my favorite so far.
Which one?
This lecture, just the last part of it.
You
Yeah.
should do intro to AI.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you.
great.
Have a good weekend.
Professor, I just wanna tell you that I got 15 minutes no camera there because my internet went went out.
That's fine. That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the lecture. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but this is recorded, so if you miss something, you can look at it later.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay,
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.